Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. The plot of the series of the Harry Potter is largely built on the struggle between good and evil, but let's dig a little deeper into the nuances. And today we'll take a look at moments when good characters did bad things that don't always get the attention they deserve. Enjoy watching. Number 1. Fred and George's antics. Fred and George Weasley are fan favourites, known for their pranks and boundless energy. However, their actions are not always harmless. For instance, they scared Ron into a panic by making him fear spiders, locked Montague in the vanishing cabinet, and used first years to test their pranks. If these two had been in Slytherin, their antics would likely have been immediately labelled as aggressive and... But since they were in Gryffindor, their behaviour was often forgiven, raising questions about the fairness of this approach. Number 2. Treatment of house elves. A very important point in the series is the treatment of house elves. Hermione created an organisation to fight for elf rights in the Goblet of Fire, but all the heroes, including Harry and Ron, looked at it with disdain. Despite the importance of the issue, none of the friends showed much interest in the lives of house elves who were living in slavery. This is a noticeable hypocrisy, especially considering that the main storyline of the series is the fight against the idea of supremacy, represented by Voldemort. Number 3. Lupin's decision. Remus Lupin is one of the most respected and beloved characters in the series. However, in the final book, when he offers Harry, Hermione and Ron to join the important mission, his behaviour seems selfish and thoughtless. Lupin was ready to abandon his wife and newborn child for the mission, which was condemned by Harry. This action cast a shadow over Lupin's image as the flawless hero and became an example of how even good characters can make mistakes that leave painful consequences. Number 4. Cedric's indifference. Cedric Diggory, although he became an ally to Harry, was still complicit in Harry's suffering during the difficult months of the 4th year. He did nothing to stop the mockery of Harry, which caused him emotional harm. If not for Harry's strong character, he might have broken under the pressure of the mockery from the entire castle. Even such good characters as Cedric are not always ready to offer help. Number 5. Molly Weasley believed Rita Skeeter. Molly Weasley, despite her kindness and care, didn't always act wisely. She believed the gossip from Rita Skeeter about Harry and Hermione instead of trusting her loved ones. This decision casts a shadow on her image as a loving and wise mother. It was especially outrageous that she sent an Easter egg as a gift to Skeeter, further highlighting her bias and lack of critical thinking. Number 6. Slughorn and his club. Horace Slughorn is a brilliant teacher and one of the most prominent figures from Slytherin. However, his teaching methods leave much to be desired. He created a club where he selected students based on his personal preferences, rather than objectively assessing their abilities. His love for favoritism and using his teaching position for personal gain tarnishes Slughorn's flawless image, despite his professionalism. Number 7. Harry's life with the Dursleys. Finally, an important aspect that often stays in the shadows, Harry's life with the Dursleys. This is not just a sad story of a boy being mistreated, it's also the story of how the adults, including Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall, did nothing to improve Harry's situation. They never visited him or intervened to at least ease his existence in a family where he was treated cruelly. None of the adults around Harry took steps to remove him from the harsh living conditions. Number 8. Neville and his dangerous mistakes. Neville Longbottom, one of the most beloved and courageous characters in the Harry Potter series, is not without his flaws. His clumsiness and absent-mindedness often put others, in dangerous situations. One such instance occurs in The Prisoner of Azkaban, when Neville's carelessness leads to a grave mistake. He writes down the passwords to the Gryffindor common room on a piece of paper and, as expected, loses it. This simple mistake allows Sirius Black, who is disguised as a harmless dog, to infiltrate the Gryffindor tower and nearly put Harry's life in danger. "He's a good lad, but he's so forgetful," says Professor McGonagall, and that forgetfulness nearly costs them dearly. This moment is a clear example of how Neville's inexperience and lack of attention to detail can have dangerous consequences. While his bravery is undeniable, he stands up to his friends when needed, and even fights to protect others. His mistakes sometimes lead to chaos. The fact that Sirius was able to access the Gryffindor Tower highlights just how significant Neville's small error was. If Sirius had been a real threat at that moment, it could have resulted in tragedy. While we love Neville for his eventual courage and growth, we must acknowledge that his carelessness, though unintentional, still had serious implications for those around him. Number 9. Hagrid's reckless teaching. Rubeus Hagrid is beloved by all for his kindness and loyalty, but when it comes to his role as a teacher, his actions often lack the responsibility one would expect. On his very first lesson teaching care of magical creatures, Hagrid introduces a hippogriff named Buckbeak to the class. While Buckbeak is a majestic creature, Hagrid fails to anticipate the consequences of Draco Malfoy's rude behavior. When Malfoy insults the hippogriff and refuses to follow instructions, the creature attacks him. "You insulted him, Malfoy," Hagrid says, justifying the attack. Yes, Malfoy was disrespectful, but as a teacher, Hagrid should have been more prepared to manage the situation. His failure to anticipate the potential danger put not only Malfoy but the entire class at risk. This incident is not an isolated one. In the Goblet of Fire, Hagrid brings his giant half-brother Grawp into the Forbidden Forest without informing anyone, thus placing students in even more danger. Though Hagrid is well-meaning, he often acts without considering the risks. "He's not dangerous," Hagrid insists, but Grawp's massive size and strength are an immediate threat. By keeping Grawp a secret and bringing him to a place where students frequently venture, Hagrid shows a lack of foresight and responsibility as a teacher. His good heart often blinds him to the real dangers his actions cause, raising concerns about his ability to properly safeguard the students in his care. Number 10. James Potter's bullying of Snape. James Potter, the heroic and beloved father of Harry, is often painted as the perfect role model, brave, charming, and noble. However, his past actions raise serious questions, especially when it comes to his treatment of Severus Snape. In the pensive scenes, Snape's memories reveal a darker side to James. He wasn't just a school bully, he humiliated Snape relentlessly, making him the laughingstock of Hogwarts. "You don't know what you're doing?" Snape says, recalling how James tormented him in front of their peers, calling him names and mocking his appearance. Despite his heroic status, James's behavior is far from justifiable, even in the context of their rivalry. Snape, though no saint himself, was subjected to unnecessary cruelty. James took every opportunity to belittle him, using his popularity and strength to humiliate Snape, who was, at the time, an awkward, unpopular student. "You're pathetic," James taunts, laughing with his friends who egg him on. The power dynamic here is clear. James, surrounded by his loyal friends, uses his position to make Snape's life miserable. This public humiliation didn't seem like an isolated incident. It was part of a larger pattern of cruelty that Snape endured at the hands of James and his friends. What makes this troubling is that James's actions are barely questioned within the context of the story. Fans often view him as a hero, overlooking his bullying behavior. Despite his later redemption as a father and a member of the Order of the Phoenix, The damage he caused to Snape is undeniable. "You don't deserve her," James says of Lily Evans, further inflaming the tension. The fact that James's cruelty is largely ignored by both the characters and the fans of the series calls into question the complexity of his character. Was he really a hero, or just another flawed figure capable of deep harm despite his noble qualities? Number 11. Ron's jealousy toward Harry. Ron Weasley, Harry Potter's loyal friend and courageous companion, is often seen as the embodiment of loyalty and bravery. However, lurking beneath his cheerful exterior is a deep well of jealousy and insecurity that occasionally surfaces, creating tension in his relationships. A prime example of this occurs during the Goblet of Fire, when Ron's jealousy over Harry's unexpected participation in the Triwizard Tournament nearly destroys their friendship. Ron doesn't try to understand how Harry was entered into the competition, instead accusing him of seeking fame. "You've got to be kidding me," Ron exclaims when he learns that Harry is the fourth champion. Instead of supporting his friend, he distances himself, consumed by the idea that Harry is simply after glory. This jealousy isn't just a one-off occurrence, it becomes a recurring theme throughout the series. In the Goblet of Fire, Ron's feelings of inadequacy are exacerbated by the attention Harry receives from others, especially when it comes to his newfound fame. Ron compares himself to Harry, feeling overshadowed by his friend's accomplishments and popularity. "I'm just a backup," Ron mutters bitterly when Harry is showered with praise. Instead of being proud of Harry, he struggles with his own sense of worth, convinced that Harry's successes are a reflection of his own failures. This rivalry becomes particularly evident when Ron feels left out in moments where Harry shines, especially in moments involving girls. His jealousy reappears in The Half-Blood Prince, when Harry and Ginny's relationship blossoms. Ron, unsure of his own romantic life, feels uncomfortable and envious of the attention Harry gets from Ginny. His resentment boils over in an awkward confrontation, revealing how deeply his insecurities affect his actions. "You didn't think I'd mind, did you?" Ron snaps, his jealousy clouding his judgment. Despite these flaws, Ron is still a true friend at his core. His moments of jealousy and envy are the result of his own insecurities, not a fundamental lack of loyalty. However, they do challenge the notion that Ron is always the unwavering, perfect companion. His jealousy complicates his character, showing that even the most loyal friends can struggle with their own demons. Through Ron, we see that friendship, like any relationship, requires more than just loyalty. It requires understanding, trust, and the ability to confront our own weaknesses. Number 12. Hermione's manipulation. Hermione Granger is often seen as the epitome of morality, intelligence, and fairness. Yet her actions throughout the series reveal that even she is willing to cross certain lines to achieve her goals. One of the most notable examples is the curse she used on the snitching member of Dumbledore's army, Marietta Edgecombe, in the Order of the Phoenix. Hermione's spell, which left Marietta covered in painful, unsightly boils, was undeniably cruel. "You shouldn't have betrayed us," Hermione says as Marietta suffers, showing little remorse for the harm caused. While Marietta's actions were wrong, Hermione's decision to punish her in such a painful way raises questions about her sense of justice. Hermione's willingness to manipulate situations for the greater good doesn't stop there. In the Deathly Hallows, she uses a powerful memory charm on her parents to make them forget about her, sending them away to Australia for their protection. "I had to," Hermione admits. "I couldn't let them stay here, not with the danger closing in." Though her intent was to protect them, the decision to alter their memories without their consent was a severe one. Her parents had no say in the matter, and their entire lives were changed by her actions. Was it right for Hermione to take such drastic measures without their approval? What's even more striking is that Hermione's decision to wipe her parents' memories is not portrayed as a moral dilemma in the narrative. Instead, it is framed as a necessary evil in the face of the war. But for the audience, it's a disturbing reminder of the manipulation that even the most righteous characters can engage in. Could Hermione have found a less extreme way to protect her parents? Or was she justified in making such a life-altering decision for them? In her pursuit of what she believes to be right, Hermione sometimes overlooks the cost of her actions on others. The question remains, how much moral flexibility should we allow even the most well-intentioned characters? In her attempts to safeguard the people she loves, Hermione crosses boundaries that challenge our perception of her as the perfect moral compass. Her actions, while understandable, remind us that even heroes can be capable of manipulation when faced with difficult choices. Number 13, Dumbledore's manipulation of Harry. Albus Dumbledore, the wise and revered mentor, is often viewed as the epitome of goodness. However, as the layers of his actions unfold, it becomes clear that his role in Harry's life was not as selfless as it seemed. Dumbledore, with all his wisdom, made calculated decisions that ultimately manipulated Harry's fate. He knew that the boy who lived was destined to die, to be the final sacrifice in the battle against Voldemort. Dumbledore never told Harry the full truth, instead letting him walk blindly towards his fate. "You must be the one to kill Voldemort," Dumbledore confesses, but he leaves out the crucial detail: Harry must die first. Dumbledore's manipulations weren't limited to just withholding information. He allowed Harry to put himself in danger year after year, knowing full well that each challenge Harry faced was a step closer to his own death. In The Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore arranges Harry's dangerous quest for the Horcruxes without fully preparing him for the inevitable outcome. "You must go through with it, Harry, no matter the cost," he tells him, pushing Harry into increasingly perilous situations. Every year, Harry's life hung in the balance, and Dumbledore, despite his deep care for the boy, allowed it to happen. Even after his death, Dumbledore continued to manipulate events from beyond the grave. His careful orchestration of Harry's path didn't stop when he was gone. Harry, in his final quest to destroy Voldemort, continued to follow Dumbledore's plans, unaware of the deeper, darker purpose behind them. Dumbledore had planned everything, even Harry's death, as part of the greater scheme to defeat Voldemort. "I am not sorry," Dumbledore's portrait tells Harry, admitting that he had used him. "You were a means to an end, Harry." In the end, Dumbledore's methods force us to question his true nature. Was he the wise and benevolent mentor we all believed him to be, or was he simply a master manipulator using Harry as a pawn in a grand chess game? By withholding the truth, by allowing Harry to risk everything, Dumbledore's actions cast a shadow over his seemingly untarnished reputation. His love for Harry was undeniable, but so was his willingness to sacrifice him. Number 14, Sirius Black's treatment of Kreacher. Sirius Black, one of the most beloved and dynamic characters in the Harry Potter series, has a darker side that is often overlooked. Despite his bravery and loyalty, his treatment of the house elf, Kreacher, reveals a deeply troubling aspect of his character. Sirius, who had grown up in the Black family's harsh, prejudiced environment, carried his resentment into adulthood, especially towards Kreacher, who had served the Black family for generations. He showed the elf nothing but disdain and hatred. "I've never had much time for Kreacher," Sirius admits, "but I don't think I ever treated him as badly as my parents did." Kreacher, despite his faults, was shaped by his harsh upbringing in the Black household. He was not a typical house elf, filled with loyalty and servitude, but a twisted reflection of the cruelty he had endured. His attitude and actions, including his eventual betrayal, were rooted in the mistreatment he suffered at Sirius's hands. It was clear that Kreacher was a product of the hatred and disregard that had been instilled in him, largely by Sirius himself. "He was a sorry excuse for a house elf," Sirius once said, dismissing Kreacher as nothing more than a nuisance. What Sirius failed to recognize was that Kreacher's deep-rooted bitterness and loyalty to the Black family were not just blind obedience. They were shaped by years of neglect and cruelty. In many ways, Kreacher's hatred for Sirius was a reflection of how Sirius had treated him. Kreacher's heart was filled with spite, Harry noticed, but the elf's spite was born from years of feeling like a tool to be used and discarded. The abuse he suffered pushed him to a breaking point, leading him to the fatal decision to betray his master. In the end, Kreacher's betrayal played a pivotal role in Sirius's tragic fate. If Sirius had shown Kreacher even a fraction of the kindness and understanding he offered his friends, the course of events might have been different. But the emotional and physical abuse Kreacher endured led to a rupture that neither could repair. Sirius's mistreatment of Kreacher became a catalyst for the elf's ultimate act of revenge, which, tragically, contributed to the death of the person who had once been his master. Number 15. McGonagall's bias against other houses. Minerva McGonagall is one of the most revered and admired characters in the Harry Potter series. Known for her strictness, intelligence, and no-nonsense approach to teaching, she is a beacon of authority and integrity at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Her reputation as a fair and just teacher is well earned, and she is often seen as a role model for both students and faculty alike. However, beneath this exterior of fairness, there exists a more complex and at times less equitable side to McGonagall's character that is often overlooked by both readers and characters within the story. Her clear favoritism toward Gryffindor students, particularly her leniency towards Harry Potter, Hermione Granger, and Ron Weasley, raises questions about her true impartiality as a teacher. Throughout the series, McGonagall is often portrayed as a strict disciplinarian, and while her commitment to discipline and structure is unquestionable, it is apparent that she turns a blind eye to certain transgressions, especially when it involves her favorite students from Gryffindor. For instance, Harry, Ron, and Hermione are frequently caught breaking school rules, whether sneaking around the castle in the middle of the night or engaging in dangerous adventures that would undoubtedly earn the ire of other teachers. Despite this, McGonagall not only allows these actions to go unpunished, but at times she even supports them, showing clear favoritism. A prime example of this can be seen during the events surrounding the Triwizard Tournament in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. Despite the fact that Harry's participation in the tournament is an accident, he didn't put his name in for consideration. McGonagall, along with other members of the staff, goes out of her way to ensure that Harry is not penalized for this violation. Instead of reprimanding him for breaking the rules of the tournament, McGonagall is concerned with his safety and offers her support, even though the rules clearly state that no one underage should be participating. Other students who break rules in a similar fashion, such as those from Slytherin, would not be shown the same level of leniency. McGonagall, in this case, chooses to ignore the rules, prioritizing Harry's well-being and his importance to the overall storyline rather than maintaining impartiality. Similarly, McGonagall's behavior during the events of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone sheds light on her bias. In this first book, Harry, Ron, and Hermione venture into the forbidden third-floor corridor despite clear instructions to avoid it. This is not a mere mistake, but a serious breach of school rules that could have resulted in severe consequences. Yet McGonagall, when she eventually learns of their transgressions, does not administer any real punishment, nor does she take any steps to ensure that they face the consequences of their actions. Instead, she is quick to dismiss the matter, likely because of her personal attachment to these three students, particularly Harry. This leniency is in sharp contrast to the treatment of students from other houses, especially Slytherins, who are frequently given harsher punishments for lesser infractions. While McGonagall's actions are often motivated by her desire to protect and support her students, particularly those she is emotionally invested in, this selective enforcement of rules undermines the very principle of fairness. As a teacher and deputy headmistress, McGonagall is expected to set an example of justice and objectivity. Yet by turning a blind eye to the transgressions of Gryffindor students, she sends a troubling message that certain students, particularly those who have earned her affection, are exempt from the consequences of their actions, while others are held to a stricter standard. Her treatment of Slytherin students serves as a stark contrast to her behaviour towards Gryffindor students. Throughout the series, McGonagall's interactions with students from Slytherin are often marked by a coldness and lack of empathy. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, for example, when Draco Malfoy uses the Sectum Sempra curse on Harry during their duel in the bathroom, McGonagall's response is far more severe and punitive than the response she would have given had the situation involved any other student, particularly a Gryffindor. She does not offer Draco any leeway or show him the same understanding that she often extends to Harry or Hermione. This creates a clear double standard within the school, one that divides students based on their house rather than their actions. In her defense, McGonagall's favoritism is not entirely unfounded. The Gryffindors, particularly Harry, Ron, and Hermione, are often at the center of the events that shape the fate of Hogwarts and the wizarding world. They are brave, resourceful, and quick-witted, often showing immense courage in the face of danger. McGonagall, as a loyal Gryffindor herself, may feel a sense of kinship with them, a desire to protect them, and an understanding of the importance of their actions. However, this does not excuse her lack of consistency when it comes to enforcing school rules, and it creates an imbalance that affects the students' experience at Hogwarts. Moreover, McGonagall's actions highlight a deeper flaw within the wizarding education system. Throughout the series, Hogwarts is depicted as a place where rules are enforced unevenly, and favoritism is often shown to certain students based on their house or personal relationships with teachers. While McGonagall's bias may not be as pronounced as some of the other characters, such as Severus Snape, it is nonetheless an issue that affects the fairness of the school environment. When students see their peers consistently being given special treatment, it undermines their trust in the system and the idea that their actions will be judged impartially. Number 16. Ginny Weasley's aggressive behaviour. B. Ginny Weasley, the youngest of the Weasley clan, is often seen as the perfect match for Harry Potter, embodying courage, independence, and charm. She grows from a shy, awkward girl into a confident and capable young woman, ultimately becoming Harry's love interest. However, throughout J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series, there are moments where Ginny's actions defy the idealized image many fans have of her. In particular, her use of dark magic on her fellow students raises questions about her character that are often overlooked. This darker side of Ginny, especially her capacity for cruelty, is an aspect of her personality that is rarely explored in depth, despite its presence in the books. One of the most striking examples of Ginny's aggression occurs during her time at Hogwarts, where she is known for her fiery temper and sharp tongue. Ginny's misdeeds are often framed as innocent pranks or as the result of her strong-willed nature, but there are several instances where she crosses the line. A prime example of this is the bat-bogey hex she casts on Zacharias Smith during her time as a member of Dumbledore's army. While on the surface it may seem like a harmless joke, the hex is far more dangerous than it initially appears. The bat-bogey hex causes grotesque, bat-like creatures to emerge from the victim's nose, which is not only humiliating, but also potentially painful. This spell is no simple prank. It is an intentional act of violence that reflects Ginny's ability to inflict harm on others, and it is used with a degree of ease that suggests her comfort with such actions. This event is not an isolated incident. Ginny's use of magic to torment her peers is a recurring theme in the books. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Ginny is described as someone who is quick to defend herself and those she cares about, but her methods often include cruel, public displays of power. While she is unquestionably skilled in magic, her confidence in using such power often manifests in ways that are unsettling. The fact that she is able to cast such a hex with little thought or remorse shows a side of her personality that contrasts sharply with the image of the sweet, brave girl she is often painted as. What makes this even more troubling is the context in which these acts of aggression occur. Ginny's behavior is often tied to her experiences with powerlessness. Having grown up as the youngest in a large family, Ginny's early life at Hogwarts is marked by feelings of inadequacy, particularly in the shadow of her older brothers and the famous Harry Potter. When Ginny finally becomes a prominent figure in the wizarding world, her newfound strength seems to bring out her darker impulses. Her actions are a reflection of how easily power can be abused when one has never truly had control over their own life. The schoolyard antics that Ginny often engages in are, in some ways, a form of reclaiming her autonomy in a world where she has been ignored or belittled for much of her early life. Perhaps the most striking example of Ginny's cruelty is her treatment of Zacharias Smith, a character who is frequently painted as an annoying and self-important student. While many fans may view her actions as justified because of Zacharias's unpleasant personality, this does not excuse the violence she inflicts upon him. Ginny's willingness to humiliate him in front of their peers with a powerful hex, causing him great discomfort, raises questions about the extent to which she is willing to wield her magic. Her actions suggest that while she may have noble intentions in some instances, she is just as capable of using her powers to harm as she is to protect. Ginny's use of magic as a tool for cruelty isn't limited to her interactions with Zacharias. During the events of the Half-Blood Prince, she is shown to have become a proficient duelist and an active participant in the fight against Voldemort's forces. While this is admirable, it also brings to light how her violent tendencies are not limited to her school pranks. In the battle for Hogwarts, Ginny becomes an integral part of the resistance, and yet her use of magic often seems just as focused on causing pain and destruction as it is on defense. The line between good and bad becomes blurred as she steps deeper into the world of combat and revenge. Another instance of Ginny's darker side is her attitude toward the other girls in the wizarding world, particularly when it comes to her romantic entanglements. Ginny's confidence in her own attractiveness and her romantic conquests, including her relationship with Harry, sometimes lead her to behave in a possessive and dismissive manner. Her jealousy toward other girls, especially when they show interest in Harry, reveals a level of insecurity that she attempts to mask through assertive, sometimes even aggressive behavior. Rather than confronting her emotions openly, Ginny often resorts to passive-aggressive tactics to secure her place in Harry's affections. While this may seem like typical teenage behavior, it still reflects a willingness to manipulate the dynamics of her relationships in order to maintain control. Despite her faults, Ginny is undeniably a strong character who does in many ways embody the values of loyalty, courage, and determination. However, her moments of cruelty cannot be ignored. While some may argue that these instances are merely the result of her fiery personality or her circumstances, it is clear that Ginny is not immune to the same flaws and moral ambiguity that affect other characters in the series. The ease with which she employs dark magic and the lack of reflection on the harm she causes to others complicate her image as the idealized heroine. Number 17. Arthur Weasley's carelessness at work. Arthur Weasley was always the epitome of kindness and cheerfulness in the Harry Potter series. He was a loving father, devoted husband, and a loyal member of the Order of the Phoenix. His quirky fascination with Muggle artifacts, which often led him to bring strange, non-magical objects into the magical world, was a defining part of his character. However, beneath his good-natured and affable exterior, Arthur's actions at the Ministry of Magic reveal an unsettling contradiction, one that raises significant moral questions. He worked for the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, focusing on the regulation of magical interactions with Muggles, yet his professional conduct often revealed a lack of integrity, especially when it came to his personal interests. His blatant disregard for the law, especially his modification of Muggle artifacts, showcases a flawed approach to responsibility that many overlook. Arthur's job in the ministry was to monitor magical law enforcement, with a particular focus on how magical society interacted with the Muggle world. This meant ensuring that magical objects didn't end up in the hands of Muggles or become too closely intertwined with non-magical lives. Yet despite his professional role, Arthur himself broke these very rules. One of his most notable personal faults was his obsession with Muggle gadgets, which he often meddled with, attempting to modify and understand their inner workings. This interest in Muggle technology was often at odds with his responsibilities at work, where he was expected to enforce laws that prevented such interactions from happening in the first place. Arthur's actions were often overlooked by those around him, but it is worth questioning why. He was a dedicated father, a well-liked member of the wizarding community, and even a crucial member of the Order of the Phoenix. These positive attributes allowed him to get away with things that would have been unacceptable in other circumstances. He was not alone in his laxity regarding Muggle artifacts. His family, particularly his wife Molly, seemed to accept his eccentricities without challenge. In many ways, his curiosity about Muggles and their technology was seen as endearing, even though he was, in essence, breaking the very laws he was supposed to uphold. Arthur's behavior highlights an uncomfortable double standard in how characters in the series are treated based on their status and relationships rather than the merit of their actions. A particular example of Arthur's missteps occurs when he modifies Muggle artifacts for personal use. One instance of this is his work with a Muggle car in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. Arthur is shown tinkering with the Muggle vehicle, making magical modifications to it, such as turning it into a flying car. This is, in essence, a direct violation of magical law, yet it is done without any serious consequences or concern from his family. In fact, Arthur's son Ron even helps him in this endeavor, further suggesting that there is a collective blindness to the serious implications of these actions. The car is not only illegally enchanted, but is also used recklessly, as it is flown to Hogwarts with no regard for the safety of its passengers or the secrecy of the magical world. The car becomes a symbol of Arthur's neglect for the rules he is supposed to enforce. One of the most disturbing elements of Arthur's actions is the fact that he not only breaks the law, but does so in a manner that puts others at risk. Flying a Muggle car to Hogwarts is not just a violation of magical regulations, it is a dangerous act that could have had severe repercussions. The use of such a vehicle endangers both the magical and Muggle worlds, risking exposure of the magical community and potentially causing harm to those who are unaware of the existence of magic. Arthur's behavior, although excused as harmless curiosity or even good intentions, is reckless at best and irresponsibly negligent at worst. His inability to see the potential consequences of his actions is deeply troubling, especially given his role as a father and a public servant in the Ministry of Magic. The fact that Arthur's actions go largely unnoticed or are easily forgiven speaks to a broader issue in the wizarding world: the willingness to overlook flaws in individuals who are otherwise well-liked or beloved. Arthur's deep flaws are often excused because of his amiable personality and his service to the Order of the Phoenix. His heroism in fighting against Voldemort and his loyalty to his family and friends seem to shield him from criticism, even when he fails in his professional duties. The fact that Arthur is given a free pass for such violations raises questions about the moral compass of the wizarding community. If a person who is otherwise seen as virtuous can act with such carelessness and still be celebrated, what does that say about the standards of accountability in their society? There is also the question of Arthur's role in teaching his children the value of responsibility and integrity. Arthur's own children, especially Ron, look up to him as a model of goodness and sincerity. Yet when they witness him breaking the rules without facing any consequences, what lesson are they learning? Ron, for example, is complicit in his father's illegal actions, and this sets a dangerous precedent. It suggests that in certain situations it is acceptable to disregard the law when personal interests or curiosities are involved. This has long-term implications for Ron's development as a character, especially when he later finds himself in situations where he must make difficult moral choices. Number 18, Hermione's spell on Xenophilius. In the final book of the Harry Potter series, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, a moment occurs that has long been a topic of debate and scrutiny among fans and critics alike. It involves Hermione Granger, one of the most beloved and morally upright characters in the series, and an action that raises significant ethical questions. The incident occurs when Hermione, Harry, and Ron find themselves at the home of Xenophilius Lovegood, Luna's eccentric father, as they seek information about the Deathly Hallows. At this point, Xenophilius has become desperate. With his daughter, Luna, missing and presumed to be in the custody of Death Eaters, he decides to betray the trio to save her. What follows is an act of magical violence that casts a shadow over Hermione's character and challenges our understanding of her moral compass. As the trio realizes that Xenophilius is about to hand them over to the Ministry of Magic, Hermione reacts with remarkable decisiveness. Without any hesitation, she casts a spell that destroys the Lovegood home, obliterating much of the furniture and belongings. This destructive action is quickly followed by the use of a memory charm on Xenophilius, rendering him oblivious to the trio's escape. On one level, Hermione's actions can be justified. The stakes are high. The three of them are fugitives, and Xenophilius' decision to betray them could lead directly to their capture and potential deaths. But as we consider the full extent of her actions, a more complex moral question emerges. Was Hermione justified in using such violent and invasive magic on a father desperate to save his daughter? For years, fans have accepted Hermione's actions as being driven by necessity and a sense of self-preservation, but on closer inspection we see that her magic is more than just a defense mechanism. Hermione is not simply using a spell to defend herself, she is actively engaging in an act of destruction and manipulation against someone who, while betraying them, is also acting out of fear and love. Xenophilius Lovegood, a man whose worldview is shaped by his love for his daughter, is driven to betray his guests in the hope of ensuring Luna's safety. His desperation is palpable, and while his actions are wrong, they come from a place of parental love, a quality that Hermione herself can deeply understand. However, Hermione's response is swift and overwhelming. There is no time given for negotiation, no attempt to understand Xenophilius's situation or to appeal to his humanity. Instead, Hermione's use of magic reflects a decision that is perhaps too easily made. She does not question the morality of destroying someone's home or erasing their memories. It is a means to an end, and in the world of the Deathly Hallows, survival often necessitates such actions. But this raises another question. How often does Hermione, throughout the series, resort to using magic without fully considering the consequences? From the very beginning of the series, Hermione is portrayed as a character who takes great care in understanding the ethical implications of magic. She is the one who takes the time to read every spell in detail and to research its history, ensuring that her actions are informed and justifiable. Yet in this moment with Xenophilius, we see a departure from this careful consideration. She uses a spell without thinking about its ramifications, how it will affect the person she is casting it on, and what it says about her character. While it is true that she is acting out of necessity, we must ask ourselves whether this moment truly reflects the Hermione we have come to know over the course of the series. This incident is particularly troubling when we compare it to other moments in the books, when Hermione's use of magic has been more measured and thoughtful. For example, when Hermione uses the memory charm on her parents in the Deathly Hallows, it is an act of self-sacrifice made with the intention of protecting them from the dangers of the wizarding world. Here, the magic is used with a deep sense of personal responsibility. In contrast, her spell against Xenophilius is driven by a more utilitarian mindset, one that prioritizes the immediate safety of her group over the well-being of others. She is willing to sacrifice Xenophilius's dignity and his relationship with his daughter in the interest of her own survival and that of her friends. It is also important to consider the nature of the magic itself. Memory charms, while commonly used in the wizarding world, are invasive and can have long-lasting consequences. To alter someone's memories is to strip them of their agency, to rob them of their ability to control their own narrative. Hermione's use of this spell on Xenophilius erases the possibility of him ever knowing what really happened that night, reducing him to an empty shell of his former self. This is a powerful act of magical violence, and while it may be justified in the context of self-preservation, it also exposes the potential dangers of using magic as a tool to impose one's will on others. The moral complexity of this situation is made even more apparent when we consider that in the same book, the trio faces other moments where they are forced to question the ethics of their actions. Take, for example, the decision to destroy the Horcruxes. While it is clear that the destruction of Voldemort's Horcruxes is essential to his defeat, the process is fraught with danger and moral ambiguity. In the case of Xenophilius, Hermione's actions are similarly driven by a desire to protect herself and her friends, but the consequences of her magic are far-reaching. She does not simply destroy an object or thwart a dark wizard, she damages a person's life, a family's future, and a relationship that is based on deep love. Some readers might argue that Hermione had no choice in this situation, that her actions were entirely justifiable. After all, Xenophilius's betrayal could have led to their capture, and in the context of the war, survival must sometimes take precedence over other considerations. But this view overlooks the fact that in her moment of need, Hermione chose to use violence as a solution. She did not seek to negotiate to appeal to Xenophilius's better nature, or to find a way to prevent the betrayal without resorting to drastic measures. Instead, she took a shortcut, using magic to manipulate the situation to her advantage. This incident also serves as a reminder of how easily the boundaries between right and wrong can become blurred in the heat of the moment. Throughout the series, Hermione is often portrayed as the moral compass of the trio, the one who stands firm in her convictions and believes in doing what is right. Yet, in this instance, we see her bending those convictions in the face of overwhelming pressure. The fact that she does not hesitate to use violent magic against Xenophilius suggests that when it comes to survival, even the most well-intentioned characters are capable of moral compromises. The use of magic in the wizarding world is often depicted as a tool that can be used for good or ill, depending on the intent of the wielder. In this case, Hermione's magic is unquestionably used for a good cause, but it raises the question of whether the ends always justify the means. Does the need to survive excuse the use of violent magic against a desperate father? And if Hermione is willing to use magic in this way, what does that say about the ethical boundaries of the wizarding world itself? In the end, Hermione's actions in the Deathly Hallows are a reminder that even the most virtuous characters are not immune to the moral complexities of war. They are forced to make decisions that have far-reaching consequences, and in doing so they must navigate the fine line between self-preservation and ethical compromise. Hermione's spell on Xenophilius Lovegood is a moment of moral ambiguity that, while understandable in context, forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that good characters are sometimes forced to make difficult and morally questionable choices. Number 19, Percy Weasley's betrayal. In the magical world of Harry Potter, where the lines between good and evil are often drawn in stark contrast, there exists a character whose actions blur these boundaries in a way that leaves a lasting impact on both his family and the reader. Percy Weasley, a member of the well-known Weasley family, becomes a prime example of a good character committing a seemingly unforgivable act, betraying his own family for the sake of his career ambitions. His story is one of the most intriguing and, in many ways, tragic arcs within the Harry Potter series, where a good person makes a choice so destructive that it challenges the very definition of loyalty and love within a family. At the beginning of the series, Percy is depicted as an ambitious, somewhat pompous young wizard, eager to prove himself beyond the shadow of his many talented siblings. As the youngest son of Arthur and Molly Weasley, Percy is no stranger to the overwhelming presence of his siblings' accomplishments, each of them shining in their own way. With a keen desire to stand out and carve his own path, Percy sees his future in the Ministry of Magic. His ambitions lead him to the position of a junior assistant to the minister, a role that he cherishes as the gateway to success. However, his journey towards professional success would come at a great personal cost, his relationship with his family. In the midst of the rising tension between the Ministry of Magic and the growing threat of Lord Voldemort's return, Percy's allegiance shifts dramatically. The conflict between the Weasley family and the Ministry deepens as the family stands firm in their opposition to the Ministry's denial of Voldemort's return. Percy, however, aligns himself with the Ministry, blind to the dangers posed by its leadership under Cornelius Fudge. He refuses to believe that his beloved minister is wrong, prioritizing his career aspirations and loyalty to the Ministry over the well-being and warnings of his own family. Percy's betrayal reaches its peak during the second book of the series, Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. At a time when his family is being hunted and persecuted by the Ministry for their support of Harry Potter and the fight against Voldemort, Percy remains resolute in his belief that his path is the right one. He does not just distance himself from his family, but actively criticizes their actions, expressing disdain for their refusal to acknowledge the ministry's authority. The Weasleys, who have always been a tight-knit unit, are torn apart by Percy's actions. The pain of his departure is most deeply felt by his mother Molly, who struggles to reconcile the son she raised with the person he has become. She cannot understand why Percy would choose a career over the family that has always been there for him. What makes Percy's betrayal so heartbreaking is the magnitude of his self-righteousness. He sees himself as the one who is correct, convinced that he is making the right choice for his future. His arrogance grows and he becomes increasingly dismissive of his family, turning his back on them in their time of greatest need. To the Weasleys, this feels like a complete rupture. Percy's judgment is not only a personal betrayal, but it also signifies his willingness to abandon the family values that have always bound them together. It is an act of profound disloyalty, a breach of the sacred trust that is central to the Weasley family dynamic. In the emotional aftermath of his decision, Percy's actions stand in stark contrast to the loyalty and love that characterize his brothers, Fred and George, and his parents. His behavior becomes a betrayal of everything the Weasley family represents: unity, compassion, and an unwavering commitment to each other, even in the face of danger. His family tries to reach out to him to remind him of the importance of standing together, but Percy's pride prevents him from acknowledging the harm he is causing. The deeper the rift between Percy and his family grows, the more isolated he becomes in his self-imposed role as a servant to the ministry. What makes Percy's story even more complicated is his eventual return. After the death of his brother Fred during the Battle of Hogwarts, Percy undergoes a profound change. The loss of Fred, combined with the realization of how much he has hurt those he loves, forces Percy to confront the extent of his mistakes. His return to his family is a moment of deep regret and sorrow. In the face of death, Percy realizes that no career, no political affiliation can ever replace the love and bond of family. The reconciliation, though heartfelt, cannot undo the damage done, and it serves as a reminder of the long-lasting consequences of betrayal. However, it is important to recognize that Percy's actions are not treated with the same level of scrutiny by the other characters or the readers. In many ways, his return to the Weasley family is almost too easy. He is forgiven, and his role within the family is restored without much of the painful reckoning that such a betrayal might warrant in the real world. It is a curious aspect of the series that despite the gravity of Percy's actions, the family forgives him relatively quickly, as if his return is seen as a natural and necessary resolution. Percy's actions are painted as a youthful mistake, an error in judgment caused by his naivety and ambition, but in many ways this leniency obscures the depth of his betrayal. In contrast, in real life, betrayal within families often has more lasting consequences. In Harry Potter, the Weasley family's forgiving nature might seem unrealistic to some readers, especially when placed in the context of the emotional pain Percy inflicted upon them. The ease with which his family accepts him back can be seen as a reflection of the themes of redemption and forgiveness that permeate the series, but it also raises the question of whether such an immediate forgiveness is warranted in the face of such a deep and personal betrayal. The rapid reconciliation of Percy's character is in part a testament to the idea of redemption that J.K. Rowling weaves into the narrative. However, it also serves to highlight a flaw in how the consequences of Percy's betrayal are handled within the broader storyline. While Percy's actions are unquestionably damaging, the story does not fully explore the emotional toll of his betrayal on those he left behind. The reader is left with the sense that Percy's return to the fold is almost too convenient, and it undermines the complexity of family loyalty and the long-term effects of betrayal. Percy's story is a poignant reminder of how ambition, pride, and blind loyalty to an institution can cloud one's judgment and lead to the fracturing of familial bonds. His decision to prioritize the ministry's power over his family's safety and values is a choice that, in the real world, would have dire consequences. However, in the magical world of Harry Potter, it is forgiven with little more than a note of regret. The juxtaposition of Percy's actions with the unconditional love of his family forces the reader to question the limits of forgiveness and the true cost of betrayal. And while Percy's story may ultimately serve as a lesson in redemption, it also reveals the darker side of human ambition and the complexities of family loyalty. Number 20, Dumbledore and Ariana's death. Albus Dumbledore's childhood was steeped in tragedy, and one of the darkest stories surrounding his early years involves his sister, Ariana. The young girl's life took a devastating turn when, at the age of 6, she was attacked by 3 Muggle boys. This attack left her mentally and physically scarred, causing her magic to become uncontrollable and unstable. The magical world, unfamiliar with such trauma, had no idea how to help her. Her mother, Kendra, did her best to care for her, but Ariana's condition only worsened. Eventually, Kendra was killed in a freak accident, leaving Ariana in the care of her older brother, Albus. At the time, Albus was a young man of exceptional intelligence and ambition, with dreams of changing the wizarding world. His mind was filled with grand visions of power and revolution. However, his sister's care was a constant reminder of his familial duty, and it became clear that the burden weighed heavily on him. Ariana's mental state required constant attention, and Albus soon grew weary of the responsibility. His desire for greatness, for a life beyond the confines of the family home, became a fierce and all-consuming obsession. In his youth, Albus was a dreamer filled with ideals of making the world a better place. His friendship with Gellert Grindelwald, a brilliant and charismatic young wizard, fueled those dreams. Together they discussed ideas of how the wizarding world could be reshaped, how Muggles could be controlled for the greater good. It was in these years that Albus's ambitions began to overshadow his familial ties, and his personal goals took precedence over the welfare of those closest to him. While Ariana's condition worsened, Albus became increasingly distant. His focus on his future, on the brilliant future he and Grindelwald could build together, left him disconnected from the immediate needs of his family. It was a time of conflict as Albus struggled to balance his dream of a new world order with the care his sister required. Ariana's condition, her magical outbursts, and her lack of control over her powers became too much for Albus to bear. He began to view her as an obstacle to his plans, a reminder of the life he was desperately trying to escape. Albus's relationship with his brother Aberforth also deteriorated during this time. Aberforth, who was more grounded and practical, saw the deteriorating state of their family and resented Albus for neglecting them. Their arguments became more frequent, and Aberforth, who had a deeper connection to the family, began to express his frustration with Albus's detachment. It was clear to Aberforth that Albus cared more for his ambitions than for his family's well-being, yet Albus's ambition blinded him, and he was determined to follow his path, regardless of the cost. The tragic culmination of this neglect occurred during a fateful night when Albus, Aberforth, and Grindelwald were engaged in a fierce magical duel. It was a moment of intense power, of magical forces clashing with brutal intensity. Ariana, caught in the crossfire, was struck by a stray curse, resulting in her death. The event shattered Albus, and he was left with the crushing guilt of knowing that his neglect and ambition had directly led to his sister's death. He had been so focused on his dreams that he had ignored the fragile reality of his family's situation, and that oversight had cost him dearly. For the rest of his life, Albus would carry the burden of that guilt. He would forever regret the choice he made, the moments when he prioritized his ambitions over the needs of his sister. And yet, in the grand scheme of things, Albus Dumbledore's actions were excused by many. He became the revered headmaster of Hogwarts, a mentor to Harry Potter, and a figure of wisdom and power. His flaws, his missteps, were often overlooked, even though they were significant and undeniably shaped his destiny. Dumbledore's relationship with Ariana is a reflection of a deeper issue within his character, his tendency to sacrifice those closest to him for the sake of his ideals. Albus was a man driven by the pursuit of knowledge, power, and a vision of the greater good. But in his pursuit, he failed to understand that the cost of such ambition could be devastating. Ariana's death was not an isolated incident. It was a consequence of Albus's choices, a result of his inability to truly understand what it meant to be a family member and not just a visionary. Throughout his life, Albus never truly reconciled with the fact that his ambitions had led to Ariana's death. He buried the guilt deep within him, choosing instead to focus on his role as a mentor to others, as a protector of Hogwarts, and later, as the key figure in the fight against Lord Voldemort. Yet, even as he worked to shape the future, the shadows of his past always lingered, haunting him in quiet moments. As Harry Potter grew older and learned more about Dumbledore's past, he came to realize that even the greatest of men have flaws, and those flaws often come at a great cost. Harry's own journey was intertwined with Dumbledore's, and as he learned about the mistakes and regrets that shaped the man he admired, Harry came to understand the complexities of heroism. He saw that Dumbledore, despite his wisdom and leadership, was not infallible. He too had made grave mistakes, and those mistakes had consequences. Dumbledore's story is one of both greatness and tragedy, a tale of a man who sought to change the world, but, in doing so, lost sight of the very things that made him human. His failure to protect Ariana, to truly care for her, was a mistake that defined him in many ways. It was a tragic irony that the man who fought so hard to protect others had failed to protect his own sister when it mattered most. In the end, Albus Dumbledore's greatest lesson was not in his triumphs, but in his failures. His recognition of his mistakes, particularly his role in Ariana's death, was a testament to his growth as a person. It was only through his acceptance of his past that he was able to move forward, to mentor Harry and others, and to finally find peace with himself. Yet the story of Ariana remains a painful reminder of the price of ambition and of the consequences that come when one becomes so focused on the future that they forget to care for the ones they love. This story of Albus Dumbledore and Ariana serves as a powerful lesson that even the greatest of characters are not without their flaws, and that the pursuit of greatness can sometimes come at the cost of the most important things in life. Number 21. Ron abandoning Harry and Hermione. In the epic narrative of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, one moment stands out as an uncomfortable and often overlooked instance of a beloved character's weakness. Ron Weasley, the ever-loyal and brave friend to Harry Potter, commits a seemingly unforgivable act that fans have long struggled to reconcile with his otherwise heroic persona. It happens during the trio's perilous journey to destroy Voldemort's Horcruxes, a mission that leads them into some of the darkest corners of the wizarding world. But amidst the tension and terror, Ron does something that leaves his friends and readers shocked. He abandons them at a moment when they need him most. This act of cowardice, though fleeting, demonstrates a vulnerability within Ron that is rarely addressed, but undeniably significant. The setting is grim. Ron, Harry, and Hermione have been on the run for months, constantly hiding from the Death Eaters, haunted by the threat of Voldemort's followers and the shadow of a war that is ripping their world apart. As they track down the pieces of Voldemort's soul, their bond is tested at every turn. Harry, ever the leader, has his focus on the larger goal, the destruction of the Horcruxes and the defeat of the Dark Lord, but even he is not immune to the strain that the journey places on them. For Hermione, her steadfast devotion to Harry and the mission keeps her grounded, but even she falters as the constant uncertainty takes its toll on her nerves. But it is Ron who experiences the most intense emotional breakdown during their journey. It begins with the trio's acquisition of the locket, a Horcrux that is not just an object of magical power, but also a dangerous psychological weapon. The locket, an ancient artifact imbued with dark magic, starts to wear down the spirits of those who possess it. Harry, Hermione, and Ron are all affected by the artifact's influence, but it is Ron who succumbs most drastically. The constant tension, coupled with the presence of the locket around his neck, amplifies his insecurities and doubts. He feels overshadowed by Harry's heroism and Hermione's intelligence. In his eyes, his contributions are small compared to theirs, and his worries about being excluded from the ultimate victory slowly fester. It's not just the locket's magic that is breaking him down, it is his own fears and insecurities that are being brought to the surface. As the trio continues their mission, the strain of being constantly hunted and the toll of their endless battles leave Ron emotionally depleted. He begins to resent the role he feels forced into, even questioning the value of continuing their journey. The effects of the locket are compounded by his simmering frustration, leading him to a breaking point. He is exhausted, mentally and physically, and his relationship with Hermione, which has always been fraught with unspoken feelings, reaches a boiling point. His jealousy and insecurity are on full display when he feels that Harry and Hermione have grown closer during their time on the run. The feeling of being the third wheel on this journey becomes unbearable for him. The moment that marks Ron's departure is a tragic one. The trio is in a forest attempting to destroy a Horcrux, and they have just come through a fierce battle. Ron, already on edge, finally reaches a point where he cannot take any more. He makes a decision that he later regrets, but that still carries lasting consequences. In an emotional outburst, he leaves Harry and Hermione behind. He claims that he cannot continue the quest, that the burden is too great, and that he can no longer deal with the constant danger they face. His departure is swift and shocking, leaving Harry and Hermione to fend for themselves. The timing of his escape is critical. He leaves in the middle of a mission that could determine their future, abandoning his friends just when they need him most. The weight of his betrayal is almost too much to bear for Harry, who, despite everything, cannot help but feel the sting of Ron's desertion. The emotional fallout from Ron's departure is immediate. Harry, devastated by the loss of his friend, is left alone with Hermione to continue their mission. In the depths of their despair, they are forced to confront the harsh reality of their situation. Without Ron, the trio is no longer complete. They are weaker, more vulnerable, and, in many ways, adrift. It is a heartbreaking moment, one that emphasizes the depth of Ron's emotional turmoil. His absence leaves an undeniable hole in the group, a hole that Hermione and Harry can never truly fill. And yet, despite the pain, they press on, driven by the hope that Ron will return. Ron's return comes later, but it is far from simple or without consequence. When he finally does return to Harry and Hermione, it is not because he has come to his senses immediately, it is because he realizes the depth of his mistake. The moment of his return is marked by his desperate attempt to redeem himself, but it is also a moment of great self-awareness. He knows that he has let his friends down, and he understands the gravity of his actions. But in the end, Ron's return is one of the most powerful moments in the series, not just because it demonstrates his loyalty and courage, but because it reveals his humanity. Ron's return is not a clean break from his earlier actions. He is still haunted by the memory of abandoning Harry and Hermione when they needed him most. He is still filled with guilt and shame over his moment of weakness, and yet, when he arrives, he does so with a sense of urgency and determination. He knows that there is still work to be done, and that his actions, though unforgivable, cannot define him entirely. It is in this moment that Ron begins to redeem himself, not just through his bravery and his fight to the end, but through his acknowledgement of his past mistakes. He faces the truth of what he did, and in doing so is able to move forward. Even though Ron's departure is a dark moment in his journey, it is also a pivotal part of his character development. It is a moment that highlights his vulnerabilities, his doubts, and his fear. While some fans may wish to ignore or downplay this episode in favor of focusing on his eventual heroism, it is important to acknowledge the complexity of Ron's character. His actions show that even the most loyal and brave individuals can be overcome by their fears, insecurities, and emotional weaknesses, and while he may have left his friends in their moment of need, it is his eventual return and his willingness to fight for redemption that makes him truly heroic. Ultimately, the episode serves as a reminder that heroes are not flawless. They are not perfect beings who always do the right thing. They are people capable of failure and mistakes. Ron's departure and return underscore the idea that true friendship is not about perfection. It is about loyalty, forgiveness, and the willingness to rise above our mistakes. While Ron's betrayal is painful to watch, it is also a testament to his growth as a character. His journey is not one of unbroken heroism, but of struggle, failure, and ultimately redemption, and it is in this struggle that he becomes one of the most relatable and beloved characters in the Harry Potter series. Number 22, Harry, using the Imperius Curse. Harry Potter, the hero who fought tirelessly for justice, made many sacrifices throughout his journey. He faced immense challenges, not only from dark forces, but also from the murky waters of morality. As a young wizard, Harry was repeatedly placed in situations where he had to make difficult choices, some of which tested his very sense of right and wrong. One of the most controversial actions in Harry's journey comes during the final book of the series, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, when he resorts to using the Imperius Curse, one of the unforgivable curses, on a Muggle in Gringotts. This act, despite the pressure of the situation, raises uncomfortable questions about where the line between hero and villain is drawn. In a world where magic exists, the idea of doing harm, especially in such a cold, controlled manner, creates dissonance between the righteousness of Harry's character and the darkness of the actions he occasionally takes. The Imperius Curse, one of the 3 unforgivable curses, is perhaps the most chilling of the dark spells. It allows the caster to take complete control over another person's actions, overriding their free will. This spell is not one used lightly, and it's considered a hallmark of evil in the wizarding world. When Harry, Hermione, and Ron infiltrate Gringotts in search of one of Voldemort's Horcruxes, the situation becomes increasingly desperate. To gain entry to a high-security vault, Harry casts the Imperius Curse on a goblin, Travers, in order to manipulate his actions. Though the spell is performed with the goal of saving lives and finding the Horcrux, the consequences of using such dark magic can never be ignored. Harry, who had always been a champion of the light using one of the darkest spells in existence, forces the reader to confront the uncomfortable truth about the blurred lines between good and evil. The context in which Harry uses the Imperious Curse cannot be ignored. It occurs during a perilous mission, and the stakes could not be higher. Harry, Hermione, and Ron are fighting for their lives against a seemingly unstoppable enemy. The need for secrecy, stealth, and speed leads them to make choices that under normal circumstances would be unthinkable. Harry, faced with the very real possibility of failure, chooses to compromise his values for the greater good of the mission. The cause is noble, to be sure, stopping Voldemort, saving the wizarding world, and ensuring the survival of countless lives. But in using the Imperious Curse, Harry breaks the moral code he has adhered to throughout the entire series. The Imperious Curse is not merely a spell, it's a violation of another's autonomy, a complete subjugation of their will. In the moment of decision, Harry is not thinking about the moral weight of his actions. He's thinking about the task at hand and the urgency of their situation. Harry's ultimate goal is to defeat Voldemort and end the war, but the fact remains that Harry used dark magic to get closer to that goal. The discomfort with this act is magnified by the understanding that this is not an isolated mistake. In Harry's journey, he had already crossed moral lines in earlier books, but this instance is different. It's not just about breaking a rule or bending a law, it's about actively using one of the darkest spells in the wizarding world, a spell that makes the user complicit in the suffering of another. What makes this act even more unsettling is the fact that, throughout the series, Harry is portrayed as a hero. He is the boy who lived, the one who fought against the dark forces since his first year at Hogwarts. He stood for justice, for courage, for the protection of the weak. His very identity as a hero is predicated on the idea that he is different from the very enemies he faces. He's not like Voldemort, not like the Death Eaters who use dark magic for their own selfish purposes. Harry's use of the Imperious Curse undermines this distinction, making him questionably close to the very thing he despises. It is a stark reminder that in moments of desperation, even the most righteous of individuals can slip into moral ambiguity. There is also the question of the psychological and emotional impact of such an act. How does Harry reconcile his actions afterward? The narrative gives us little insight into his internal struggle with the curse he cast, and yet the consequences of using dark magic are significant. Harry is not immune to the weight of his actions, even if he does not explicitly dwell on them. Throughout the series, Harry's moral compass is depicted as strong, yet here he chooses the easy, pragmatic solution. His decision is made quickly, without much thought, as if the gravity of the curse is drowned out by the urgency of the mission. But it remains this imperfection in his character. It's a crack in the flawless veneer of Harry Potter as a hero. When we consider the bigger picture, we must also think about the nature of war. War forces individuals into impossible situations where choices are rarely clear-cut. Heroes are not always able to maintain their moral purity when their survival is on the line, and their actions have consequences beyond what is immediately visible. Harry's decision to use the Imperious Curse speaks to the complexities of war, where sometimes the greater good can justify actions that, in normal circumstances, would be abhorrent. But this raises the critical question, where do we draw the line between right and wrong in wartime? Is it ever acceptable to use dark magic for the sake of defeating a dark wizard? Can the ends justify the means, or does the use of such power tarnish the very cause being fought for? Harry's action also invites us to examine the role of power in shaping a person's character. The Imperious Curse, like the other unforgivable curses, is a tool of control, of domination. By using it, Harry is momentarily embracing a power he has always fought against. The danger of wielding such power is that it can seduce even the most virtuous of individuals. The temptation to use it for good causes to achieve a worthy end is ever present, especially in situations like the one Harry finds himself in. But what happens when the line between using power for good and using power for evil becomes blurred? Can Harry's righteous intentions excuse his decision to use dark magic? Or does the mere act of using such power make him complicit in the same darkness he is fighting against? In the end, Harry's use of the Imperious Curse is an unsettling moment in the Harry Potter series. It challenges the notion of absolute morality, reminding us that even the most heroic characters can falter. It forces readers to question the boundaries of heroism and the cost of making the right choices. When Harry used the Imperious Curse, he was not thinking about the moral ramifications. He was thinking about what needed to be done to stop Voldemort. But in that moment, Harry revealed the difficult truth. Even the best of us can be pushed to make decisions that in the light of day feel like moral compromises. The line between hero and villain is not as clear as we'd like to believe, and sometimes to defeat darkness, we may find ourselves dipping into the very same shadows we seek to vanquish. Number 23, Bill Weasley's absence as a father. Bill Weasley stands as one of the more beloved figures in the Harry Potter series. The oldest Weasley sibling, Bill's reputation is built on his bravery, his commitment to the fight against Voldemort, and his steady presence during the chaos of the Second Wizarding War. As a member of the Order of the Phoenix, a former Gryffindor prefect, and a key player in the Battle of Hogwarts, Bill's role is significant in the narrative. His heroism shines through on the battlefield, but his life after the war reveals something that fans rarely address. Despite being a husband and father, Bill's portrayal in the books leaves a glaring gap when it comes to his fatherly duties, offering a troubling perspective on how some good characters can unintentionally neglect their parental responsibilities. Bill Weasley's transition from an active fighter in the war to a seemingly passive participant in family life is striking, and his behavior raises questions about the expectations placed on him as a father. He marries Fleur Delacour, a witch from a prestigious family, and together they bring into the world their daughter, Victoire. This should have been a significant moment both in their personal lives and within the broader scope of the family dynamic. However, when it comes to raising their child, Bill is largely absent, neither in the books nor in J.K. Rowling's interviews does Bill ever take the lead in the crucial moments of parenthood. His absence from many key family moments highlights a disconcerting aspect of his character, one that fans tend to overlook. Bill, the hero, appears to abandon the role of the father at the very moment when his child would need him most. The most prominent example of Bill's lack of visible parental involvement comes in the final scenes of the series. In the epilogue of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, when Harry, Ginny, Ron, and Hermione are at platform 934 seeing their children off to Hogwarts, Bill and Fleur's daughter Victoire is present. Yet it is strikingly clear that Bill is not actively engaged in her life at this moment. He is almost an afterthought in the scene. While Fleur is shown interacting with her daughter, Bill's presence is subdued and largely irrelevant to the moment. His absence of any obvious emotional connection to his child is perplexing, given how important his role as a father should be. At this point in the story, the war is long over, the battle has been fought, and peace has returned to the wizarding world. It is a time when the focus shifts to rebuilding lives, to forming families, and to taking care of those who have survived. Bill's invisibility in his daughter's life during this critical moment speaks volumes about how little attention has been paid to his role as a father. There is no indication that he is the nurturing, protective figure one might expect of a father who fought so hard for the safety and future of his loved ones. Instead, he has, in a sense, vanished from the familial stage. This absence stands in stark contrast to his active and influential role in the war. Bill Weasley is portrayed as a courageous warrior, a man who put himself in harm's way to fight against the forces of evil. His ability to remain calm and focused under pressure made him an asset to the Order of the Phoenix. He worked tirelessly to ensure the safety of the wizarding world, including taking on a dangerous job as Gringotts' head of security. But when it comes to his family, this same dedication and intensity seem to fade into the background. One could argue that Bill's heroism should have been enough to establish his worth as a father. After all, his actions during the war were what ensured the future for his children. However, parenting requires more than just the act of protecting. It demands ongoing emotional investment, time, and care. Bill's behavior after the war suggests that he is not fully invested in this role. Unlike his brothers, who are shown to take on more active roles in their children's lives, Bill's neglect of his fatherly duties raises questions about his character and the expectations placed on him as a good guy in the series. There is a certain irony in this portrayal. Bill's heroism during the war is lauded, but his lack of engagement in the family sphere goes largely unaddressed. It is as though his earlier deeds are enough to absolve him of any shortcomings as a parent. In many ways, this parallels the larger narrative of heroism in the Harry Potter series. While characters like Harry, Hermione, and Ron are frequently examined in terms of their flaws and growth, Bill's shortcomings as a father are quietly overlooked. His heroism is seen as a reason to forgive his failure to be an active part of his child's life. It is also worth noting that Bill's lack of presence in the books reflects a broader trend in the series of portraying male characters who are frequently absent when it comes to the emotional labor of parenting. While mothers like Molly Weasley, Narcissa Malfoy, and Hermione Granger are shown in moments of deep concern for their children, the fathers often fall into the background. This trend is especially apparent when it comes to Bill, whose absence in the family unit seems to go unnoticed by both the characters and the readers. His lack of parental initiative becomes all the more troubling when compared to the active involvement of other father figures in the series, such as Arthur Weasley or Sirius Black. Bill's behavior also draws attention to a significant issue in the depiction of fatherhood in popular media. While fathers are often praised for their heroic actions, their emotional and domestic roles are frequently underplayed. In Bill's case, the series does not dwell on the difficulties of parenting in a post-war world. Instead, the focus remains on his heroics, his marriage to Fleur, and the battle he fought. But what about his role as a father? The story provides little exploration of how Bill copes with the responsibilities of fatherhood, which raises the uncomfortable question: does being a good man and a good fighter automatically make one a good father? This question becomes even more pressing when we consider how much attention is given to other aspects of Bill's character. His physical injury from the werewolf attack, his relationship with Fleur, and his bravery during the war are all given substantial focus, but his role as a parent is scarcely touched upon. It is as though the narrative assumes that by virtue of his heroic past, he will naturally excel in fatherhood without the need for further exploration. The absence of Bill's character in the post-war family dynamic also points to a troubling reality within the Weasley family itself. The Weasleys, for all their love and unity, do not have an ideal model of fatherhood. Arthur Weasley is perhaps the closest to a nurturing father figure, but even he is not without his flaws. Bill's failure to step up as a father to his own children may reflect a larger pattern within the family, one that involves prioritizing external duties, whether it's the fight against Voldemort or maintaining the family's status, over the emotional needs of their loved ones. In the end, Bill Weasley's character offers a complex yet unresolved portrayal of fatherhood. While he undoubtedly excels in the external battles of the wizarding world, he seems to disappear when it comes to the intimate, day-to-day struggles of raising a child. It is a sad irony that despite his significant role in the fight for the future, Bill's legacy as a father is left largely unexplored. In this way, his character serves as a reminder that even the most heroic figures are not immune to the failings that come with personal responsibility. Number 24, Tonks and her reckless love. Nymphadora. Tonks was a character who captivated readers with her joy, strength, and fierce loyalty. With her vibrant personality and humorous demeanor, she quickly became a beloved member of the Harry Potter series. Tonks was a skilled auror, a member of the Order of the Phoenix, and a woman who embodied the idea of bravery and defiance in the face of the dark forces that threatened her world. But beneath her playful exterior, there was a part of her that made decisions based on deep emotions rather than careful thought, decisions that, in the end, led to tragic consequences. One of the most complicated and controversial aspects of Tonks's character is her relationship with Remus Lupin. Theirs was not a simple love story, but one marked by the deep complexities of fear, insecurity, and ultimately, loss. Lupin, a man scarred by his past, lived with the constant burden of being a werewolf, and because of this, he felt unworthy of love. He feared that his condition would be a burden to anyone who loved him, especially a woman as vibrant and full of life as Tonks. Throughout the series, it's clear that Lupin's self-doubt and fear of hurting those he loved dominated his thoughts and actions. Despite Lupin's repeated protests and reluctance, Tonks insisted on pursuing a relationship with him. She ignored his fears, his insistence that he was unworthy of her love, and in the process she made a decision that would forever change the course of their lives. Tonks' insistence on marrying Lupin, despite his reluctance, became a key turning point in their relationship. Her love for him was genuine, and she could not comprehend why he kept pushing her away. But the situation grew more complicated when they decided to have a child, a decision made during the dark days of the Second Wizarding War. Tonks' actions in pursuing a relationship with Lupin, and especially her insistence on starting a family despite the dangers, are often viewed with mixed feelings by readers. On one hand, her love was undeniably pure, a love that defied the odds, and her strength in the face of the challenges Lupin presented was admirable. On the other hand, her actions seemed reckless and imprudent, especially given the state of the world around them. In the middle of a war with Voldemort's forces growing stronger by the day, bringing a child into the world was a dangerous choice. It wasn't just about their happiness, it was about the future of their child and the consequences that could arise from such a decision. While Tonks's love for Lupin is undeniably touching, there is an underlying recklessness in her actions. The urgency with which she pushed for marriage, her refusal to acknowledge the risks involved in raising a child during a time of war, and the way she ignored Lupin's objections reflect a lack of foresight. It's easy to romanticize the idea of love as something that transcends all obstacles, but in the context of war, love alone is not enough to guarantee safety or a happy future. When Tonks decided to marry Lupin and have a child, she was choosing to disregard the uncertainty of their situation, and ultimately, this led to a tragic outcome. The consequences of Tonks's actions became painfully clear on the night of the Battle of Hogwarts. Both Tonks and Lupin, despite their deep love for each other, met their untimely deaths in the chaos of the final confrontation with Voldemort's forces. Their son Teddy was left an orphan, with no parents to guide him or show him the world that they had hoped he would inherit. The tragedy of their deaths is not just the loss of two characters who had so much potential, but the fact that their child was left to grow up without the guidance of the very people who had fought so hard for a better future. The choice that Tonks made to marry Lupin and have a child, despite the obvious dangers, is one of the more tragic examples of love blinding reason in the Harry Potter series. While it is easy to sympathize with her, understanding the depth of her emotions, it is impossible to ignore the consequences of her decision. In her pursuit of happiness and love, she failed to take into account the larger picture, the world around her, the people who depended on her, and most importantly, the future she was creating for her son. Tonks' actions also highlight an important theme in the series: the complexity of good characters and the flaws that often exist alongside their virtues. Good people, like Tonks, are not perfect. They make mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes are costly. Her decision to insist on a relationship with Lupin, to have a child during a time of war, was a mistake that led to a devastating outcome. But this mistake does not make her a bad person. In fact, it only serves to remind us of the complexities of human nature, the way love, especially a love as pure as hers, can sometimes cloud judgment and lead to choices that, in hindsight, are reckless. Tonks's story is a stark reminder that even the most noble and courageous characters can make poor decisions. It is a cautionary tale about the dangers of letting emotions override practical concerns. The love she shared with Lupin was powerful and beautiful, but it was also fraught with risks. In their desire to build a life together, Tonks and Lupin both ignored the dangers around them, and ultimately they paid the price. This tragic outcome, however, does not diminish the love they shared. It simply illustrates the consequences of acting impulsively, driven by emotions that are not always tempered by reason. While it is easy to view Tonks' actions as misguided, it is important to remember that her choices were made from a place of love and a desire to build a future. Her decision to marry Lupin and have a child was not an act of selfishness, but rather one driven by the belief that love could overcome all obstacles. Yet in doing so, she failed to consider the larger implications of her decisions. It was not that she didn't care about the dangers, rather she believed in the power of love so deeply that she couldn't imagine a life without it. In the end, Tonks's story serves as a poignant reminder that love, while one of the most powerful forces in the world, can sometimes cloud our judgment and lead to choices that, in the context of a larger world, may not be the wisest. Tonks, like many characters in the Harry Potter series, is a complex figure who demonstrates the importance of balance between emotion and reason, love and responsibility. Her tragic fate reminds us that while love can guide us, it is not always enough to protect us from the harsh realities of the world we live in. Number 25. Abraxas Malfoy, the Forgotten Elitist. Abraxas Malfoy, the father of the infamous Lucius Malfoy, is a name that echoes quietly in the annals of wizarding history, largely overshadowed by the more prominent figures of his time. While his name is barely mentioned in the Harry Potter series, his legacy looms over the events that unfold. Abraxas was a man whose influence was undeniable, and yet he remains a forgotten figure among the heroes of the wizarding world, a figure whose actions went largely unchallenged, despite the darkness they were steeped in. His life and his actions represent a paradox of values, one that is often overlooked or excused by the very society that he sought to manipulate. Abraxas Malfoy was an influential member of the wizarding elite, a man whose connections ran deep within the Ministry of Magic. His status as a wealthy, powerful, and well-connected aristocrat allowed him to wield considerable influence, both socially and politically. As a member of the old, pure-blooded families, he was a staunch supporter of the purity of wizarding bloodlines, a sentiment that found favor among many of the wizarding elite, but it was also one that made him a natural ally to the dark forces rising in the wizarding world. Though officially not a Death Eater, his ideologies and actions placed him firmly in the same camp as Lord Voldemort and his followers. He may not have been part of Voldemort's inner circle, but his sympathies were clear, and his actions spoke volumes. The Malfoy family, with its deep-rooted history of magical prowess, had always placed great emphasis on maintaining the purity of blood, viewing the non-magical community, Muggles, as inferior. This ideology was ingrained in the very fabric of their being, passed down from one generation to the next. Abraxas, despite his seemingly more diplomatic approach, adhered to these beliefs and worked tirelessly to uphold them, even if it meant fostering close ties with those who would later become part of the most dangerous faction in the wizarding world. He was known for his connections with prominent members of the ministry, and his influence within the circles of power allowed him to push for policies that benefited the pureblood families, often at the expense of Muggle-borns and half-bloods. What is most striking about Abraxas Malfoy is not necessarily his open allegiance to dark forces, but rather the way his actions were excused or overlooked by the wizarding community. His wealth, his status, and his influence acted as a shield, protecting him from the scrutiny that might have otherwise befallen someone of lesser standing. He was not a man who wore the mask of villainy in the way that Voldemort did. Instead, he was a man who understood the power of subtlety, who knew that true control came not from overt displays of power, but from the ability to manipulate and sway those in positions of authority. He was able to push forward his agenda without ever fully committing to the extreme actions that Voldemort would later embrace. His influence, however, was no less dangerous. In many ways, Abraxas Malfoy's actions embody the insidious nature of the wizarding world's obsession with blood purity. While Voldemort sought to bring about an overt, violent revolution, Abraxas was content to work from the shadows, lobbying for laws that favored purebloods, subtly influencing policy, and ensuring that the wizarding world remained firmly in the hands of the elite. He was a man who understood the importance of maintaining the status quo, of ensuring that his family and others like it continued to prosper, regardless of the suffering it caused others. His wealth and status allowed him to remain above reproach, and his ideological sympathies with Voldemort made him an accomplice to the darkness that was beginning to spread. While Abraxas Malfoy's actions were always veiled in a semblance of respectability, it is clear that he was a man whose principles were far from virtuous. He was not a man of outright evil in the traditional sense, but he was certainly a man who turned a blind eye to the suffering of others. His adherence to the values of blood purity and his refusal to acknowledge the humanity of Muggle-borns and half-bloods were not only prejudiced, but also dangerous. Yet despite these actions, he remained a respected figure in the wizarding world, never once facing the kind of scrutiny that would befall others who held similar views. His status as a member of the old wizarding elite allowed him to operate with impunity, to act with a kind of quiet malevolence that would have gone unnoticed if it were not for the growing influence of his son, Lucius. Lucius Malfoy, despite his later overt loyalty to Voldemort, was in many ways a product of his father's influence. Abraxas's strict adherence to the Malfoy family's ideals, those of blood purity, aristocratic dominance, and the marginalization of those deemed lesser, shaped Lucius into the man he would become. Lucius, much like his father, was never one for direct confrontation, preferring instead to use his wealth, his influence, and his connections to manipulate events from behind the scenes. In this way, Lucius was the perfect heir to Abraxas's legacy. While Lucius's actions as a Death Eater would be far more overt and violent than his father's, he shared the same ideological foundation. He was, in essence, continuing the work that his father had started. Abraxas Malfoy, however, was not simply a puppet master pulling strings from the shadows. He was a man who understood the power of image and respectability, and he worked tirelessly to cultivate an image of himself as a respected member of society. He was not one to flaunt his views in public, preferring instead to operate quietly behind the scenes where his wealth and connections could shield him from the consequences of his actions. In this way, he represented a form of evil that is often more difficult to combat than the overt malevolence of someone like Voldemort. Abraxas's actions were insidious, and they were woven into the very fabric of the wizarding world. His influence helped perpetuate the culture of elitism and prejudice that would later be used by Voldemort and his followers to justify their violent actions. Though Abraxas Malfoy was never officially a Death Eater, it is clear that his beliefs and actions made him a staunch ally of Voldemort and his followers. His role in the early years of Voldemort's rise to power, though often overlooked, was crucial. He may not have participated in the more extreme acts of violence, but his ideological alignment with Voldemort and his support of the Dark Wizard's goals cannot be denied. Abraxas was a man who saw the world through the lens of pure blood superiority, and his actions were always directed toward ensuring that those like him remained in control. In many ways, he was a precursor to the darker days that would follow, a man whose actions, though subtle, laid the groundwork for the horrors to come. In the end, Abraxas Malfoy is a figure whose legacy is defined by the actions he took and the values he upheld, but also by the way those actions were excused or overlooked by the larger wizarding community. He was a man whose influence was immense, whose actions were often harmful, yet who was able to navigate the complexities of the wizarding world with a kind of quiet grace. He represents a kind of evil that is often more insidious and harder to confront than the overt violence of Voldemort and his followers. Abraxas Malfoy in his time was an influential figure whose true nature was often concealed by his wealth, his status, and the respectability that came with being a member of the wizarding elite. His story is a reminder that evil is not always obvious, and that sometimes the most dangerous individuals are those who hide behind a mask of respectability. Number 26. Flitwick's passivity during crisis. Professor Filius Flitwick, revered for his kindness, wisdom, and exceptional magical prowess, holds a position of respect at Hogwarts. As the charms professor, he is known for his small stature, his cheerful demeanor, and his ability to teach intricate spells to students. Yet behind his amiable exterior, a more troubling aspect of his character remains largely unnoticed. Despite his considerable abilities and influence within the wizarding world, Flitwick, for much of the saga, remains a passive observer in the key moments of conflict that define the fight against the forces of darkness. This passive role is especially striking when one considers his background. He is not only a professor, but also a former duelist, someone who has proven skills in defense and offensive magic. However, when the stakes were highest, particularly during the rise of Lord Voldemort and the reign of the Ministry's oppressive influence, Flitwick's inaction stands out as a glaring absence in the battle for Hogwarts and the wizarding world. One of the most glaring examples of Flitwick's passivity comes during the events of Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. It is here that Harry and his friends are subjected to the harshest scrutiny from the Ministry of Magic, led by the incompetent and authoritarian Cornelius Fudge. As Harry becomes a symbol of resistance, the Ministry launches a full-scale propaganda campaign to discredit him. Throughout this period, the students of Hogwarts are caught in the crossfire. In particular, Harry is tormented by Dolores Umbridge, the Ministry's representative at Hogwarts, who uses the Cruciatus curse on him, but no one comes to his defense. As a respected member of the staff, Flitwick had the power to intervene. He was, after all, a magical expert capable of standing up to Umbridge. Yet he refrains from taking action. Flitwick's lack of involvement in confronting Umbridge is perplexing. While he may have seen the cruelty of her actions, he remained silent. The emotional and physical abuse Harry endured, particularly during his detentions with Umbridge, was widely known among the staff. Yet, no one stepped forward to stop the tyrant who had taken over the school. There is no moment in the narrative where Flitwick raises his voice against the Ministry's cruelty or offers his support to Harry, who, despite being a student, was essentially battling against a corrupt government. Given Flitwick's position as a former duelist, one could imagine how he might have been an important figure in the resistance. Yet he remained on the sidelines, content with his role as a bystander rather than becoming an active player in the fight for justice. The same indifference is apparent when the Ministry begins its overt propaganda against Harry. The Ministry spreads lies about his supposed connection to the Dark Lord, turning the wizarding world against him. While some members of the staff, like Professor McGonagall, voice their concerns and stand by Harry, Flitwick does not appear to engage in any meaningful way. His silence is especially striking when we consider that he was well aware of the threat posed by Voldemort and had the means to help Harry defend himself. His role, rather than as an ally, is that of a passive observer, watching as the political landscape worsens without ever once stepping forward to protect those in need. The lack of Flitwick's involvement becomes even more troubling as the story progresses into the 6th and 7th books, where the stakes become even higher. During Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Harry is at the peak of his emotional and magical growth, facing down increasingly dangerous situations. The Death Eaters have infiltrated Hogwarts and the school is under constant threat, yet, even then, Flitwick remains relatively uninvolved. When the battle rages in the final book, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Flitwick plays a supporting role in the battle at Hogwarts, but his actions are largely reactive rather than proactive. While other members of the staff, such as McGonagall and Snape, play crucial roles in leading the defense of the school, Flitwick's contributions are more limited. His passive role during these critical moments paints a troubling picture of a character who, despite his power, does not use it to its fullest potential when it matters most. One possible explanation for Flitwick's inaction is his deep sense of self-preservation. Throughout the series, Flitwick is depicted as a cheerful, non-confrontational character, someone who avoids conflict whenever possible. He is perhaps the last person anyone would expect to lead a rebellion or to stand up against the forces of darkness. His avoidance of confrontation may stem from a desire to protect himself and his position at Hogwarts. It's easy to see how a character like Flitwick, who enjoys a relatively peaceful existence, might hesitate to risk his life or his career in the face of such grave danger. After all, many characters in the series, such as Hagrid, McGonagall, and even Harry, often take dangerous stands against overwhelming odds, but Flitwick remains comfortably removed from these conflicts. However, this desire for self-preservation comes at a cost. In times of crisis, when action is needed the most, Flitwick's failure to step forward is glaring. The fact that he remains passive during the period of Voldemort's rise to power is especially notable because of his background. As a former duelist, Flitwick is no stranger to combat. He has the skills and experience to contribute meaningfully to the fight, yet he chooses not to act. This failure to intervene speaks to a larger issue within the wizarding world, where many individuals choose to turn a blind eye to the growing darkness around them, whether out of fear, apathy, or the belief that it is not their fight. Perhaps it is Flitwick's status as a professor that plays a role in his reluctance to engage in the battle against Voldemort. Teachers at Hogwarts are often depicted as figures of authority and stability, meant to maintain order and discipline within the school. Flitwick, as the charms professor, may have seen his role as a purely educational one, believing that he should remain neutral in the conflicts brewing around him. His lack of involvement could be interpreted as a desire to maintain the integrity of the school to avoid causing further disruption by aligning himself with either the Order of the Phoenix or the Ministry. However, this neutrality comes at the expense of standing up for what is right. It is one thing to remain neutral in political matters, but it is another to sit idly by as students suffer under the oppressive rule of Umbridge and the Ministry. The students at Hogwarts, especially Harry, needed guidance, support, and protection from the very people who were supposed to be their protectors. Flitwick, with his knowledge of charms and magical defense, could have been an invaluable ally to Harry and his friends during this dark time. Instead, he allowed the political forces to take their toll on the students without offering any resistance. Flitwick's role as an observer rather than an active participant in the conflict raises larger questions about the role of authority figures in times of crisis. Throughout the series, we see a recurring theme of individuals who choose to stand up against tyranny, such as Harry, Hermione, and Ron. These characters risk everything for what they believe is right. However, Flitwick's passivity serves as a reminder that not all people are willing to make the same sacrifices. In his case, his silence is not a sign of moral failure, but rather a reflection of the difficult choices individuals must make when confronted with overwhelming odds. Ultimately, Flitwick's role in the Harry Potter series is a complex one. While he is undoubtedly a good person and a talented wizard, his failure to take an active role in the resistance against Voldemort and the Ministry is a flaw that cannot be ignored. His passivity during the most critical moments of the story speaks to the larger issue of inaction in the face of injustice. In many ways, Flitwick's character serves as a reminder that even the most well-meaning individuals can fail to act when the stakes are at their highest, and that sometimes the greatest courage comes not from magical power, but from the willingness to stand up and fight for what is right. Number 27, Dumbledore's Army and Unsafe Training. In the vast world of Harry Potter, one of the most pivotal moments of the series is when Harry, Hermione, and Ron take it upon themselves to form Dumbledore's Army, a secret student organization meant to train and protect their peers from the looming threat of Voldemort and his Death Eaters. This was a daring and rebellious act, especially given the strict Ministry of Magic's opposition to any form of unsanctioned magic practice in Hogwarts. The trio's decision to create the army was not just brave, it was a necessary response to the failure of the Ministry and the school's leadership to adequately prepare the students for the dangers they would face. However, while the army's mission was noble, the way it was carried out raises an important question. At what point does the good of the many justify actions that can be deemed reckless or even harmful? Dumbledore's army was not just a secret society, it was a school of magic in itself, where young students were taught to defend themselves using powerful and dangerous spells. Harry, Hermione, and Ron, acting as the core instructors, taught their fellow students advanced defensive magic, spells that could cause severe harm if used incorrectly. The trio, though talented, were teenagers themselves with little to no formal training in teaching or in fully understanding the consequences of their actions. They encouraged their peers to cast spells like Expelliarmus, Protego, and Petrificus. Totalis, without fully considering the risk of misfires or accidents that could happen in an uncontrolled environment. The meetings of the army were held in secret, away from the prying eyes of the school faculty, most notably Professor Umbridge, who had made it clear that any act of rebellion would be harshly punished. The lack of adult supervision, while a reflection of the students' desire for autonomy, also highlighted a serious flaw in their approach. They were experimenting with dangerous magic without any guidance from more experienced wizards. The risks were immense. What if one of the students, caught up in the excitement of learning new spells, accidentally harmed themselves or someone else? What if a spell backfired, or a student became overwhelmed by the intensity of the training? One of the most significant examples of this potential danger is when Harry teaches the students how to summon their Patronuses, a difficult and highly advanced charm. Harry, having struggled with the Patronus charm himself, barely managed to summon his own, and yet he was teaching younger, less experienced students to perform it. The Patronus charm, as we know, is not only extremely difficult to cast, but it is also a magical act deeply tied to the caster's emotions. The risk of failure was high, and the emotional strain on the students could have led to serious consequences. When Harry taught this spell, he did so with the assumption that they would be ready, but the emotional weight of the spell, coupled with the dangers of not performing it correctly, was not fully addressed. The question that inevitably arises is, who was responsible if something had gone wrong? Was it Harry, the leader of the group, whose decisions were directly shaping the actions of the students? Was it Hermione who played a key role in organizing the meetings and ensuring the army ran smoothly? Or was it Dumbledore, the headmaster, who, although fully aware of what was happening, chose to turn a blind eye to it? Dumbledore, a man who had always prided himself on his wisdom, made the conscious decision not to intervene in the formation of the army, believing that the students needed to take control of their own destinies. His decision, while born out of a desire to empower the students, also raised questions about the ethics of leadership. He allowed them to venture into dangerous territory without providing the necessary guidance, which ultimately led to the inevitable consequences. Despite his apparent indifference, Dumbledore's actions were not entirely passive. He understood that the students needed to learn to fight, and he did offer subtle guidance in the background. But this raises another uncomfortable question. Was Dumbledore right to allow the students to practice dangerous magic without adult supervision? In many ways, his decision was based on a belief in the students' resilience and potential. He trusted Harry, Hermione, and Ron to lead the army, knowing that they would act with the best of intentions. However, Dumbledore also knew that the risks of fighting the dark forces could not be avoided, and that in order to truly prepare for the coming war, the students had to learn how to defend themselves. At the same time, it's hard to ignore the fact that if something had gone wrong, the consequences would have been catastrophic. The students, many of them still in their early teens, were practicing life and death magic with no real supervision, and there was no guarantee that they would be able to handle the power they were learning to wield. They were untrained in the complex emotional aspects of the magic and had not yet fully developed the self-control needed to cast spells with precision. In such a high-pressure environment where the stakes were so high, mistakes could have easily led to serious injuries or even fatalities. In this context, it seems clear that the formation of the army, while admirable in its intentions, was also reckless and dangerous. Consider the situation with Harry himself. He was, at the time, a young boy who had already experienced more trauma and danger than most adults, but even he was not immune to making mistakes. Harry's actions often had consequences that he did not foresee, and his decision to form the army was no different. He was caught up in the excitement of teaching others, in the thrill of defying authority, and in the belief that they were doing something good. But what about the potential risks? What if someone had been hurt? What if the army's work had drawn unwanted attention, leading to an attack on the students or the school. Harry's actions, while well-meaning, were driven by his emotions and sense of urgency, which clouded his judgment at times. In fact, the army's success in teaching students to defend themselves ultimately came with its own set of problems. The very act of teaching students to fight back against dark forces brought them into direct conflict with the Ministry of Magic, leading to the eventual breakdown of relations between Hogwarts and the government. The creation of the army, while it empowered the students, also set in motion a chain of events that would have far-reaching consequences, both for the students and for the magical world at large. And so, the formation of Dumbledore's army stands as both a bold and morally ambiguous act. It was a moment in which good intentions collided with the harsh realities of the world they were living in. Harry, Hermione, and Ron, in their desire to protect their peers, found themselves leading an operation that, while necessary, was fraught with danger. Dumbledore, for his part, stood by, trusting that the students would learn and grow, but also accepting the possibility that things might go wrong. In the end, the creation of the army was a necessary step in the students' journey toward maturity, but it also underscored the uncomfortable truth that even the most righteous of actions can have unintended consequences. As much as we want to believe that good always triumphs, the world of Harry Potter reminds us that the line between right and wrong is often more complicated than it seems.